We're skipping the standard pleasantries today because we are stepping directly into the dark science of human behavior. Have you ever looked at someone trapped in a really destructive dynamic and wondered, why don't they just leave? Or, maybe you've been there yourself, feeling this undeniable magnetic pull towards someone who just consistently brings chaos into your life. Well, in today's explainer, we are decoding the unseen architecture behind this entire phenomenon. We're going to break down the actual neurochemical systems that bad actors exploit to keep people hooked. Okay, let's dive into this. Why does your brain confuse fear with love? It's honestly the ultimate paradox of human relationships. We are biologically wired to seek safety, connection, and peace. Yet in toxic relationships, we find ourselves intensely craving validation from the exact same person who is causing us emotional pain. To the outside world, sure, it looks completely irrational. But inside the brain, it makes terrifyingly perfect sense. Section 1. The unseen trap. The very first thing we need to do is completely reframe how we view this dynamic. Society loves to frame staying in a toxic relationship as a behavioral weakness, right? Like it's just a lack of willpower or low self-esteem on the victim's part. But science tells a completely different story. Instead of a personal failure, we're actually looking at a systematic biological exploit engineered by a manipulator. They are literally hacking the primitive survival systems of the human brain. And their weapon of choice? Intentional unpredictability. See, a manipulator doesn't treat you poorly all the time. If they did, you just leave. Instead, they alternate harsh emotional punishment, like days of cold, angry silence, with random bursts of intense affection. Think a sudden romantic gift, an extravagant date, or these sweeping declarations of love completely out of nowhere. This whiplash effect weaponizes your natural neurochemistry. It specifically targets your threat detection and reward centers to trap you in a chemical cycle. And because of this chaos, a terrifying psychological principle takes over. The mind protects certainty before it protects truth. The human brain hates unpredictability more than almost anything else. It essentially views the unknown as a biological threat. So just to survive the chaos, the victim's brain will literally deceive itself. It'll rationalize the abuse, amplify those rare moments of affection, and invent a narrative of a stable, deeply connected bond, all just to maintain an illusion of certainty. Section 2. The science of unpredictability. Let's move to and see how this builds as we travel back to 1954 to understand the origins of this exploit. To truly understand this biological trap, we actually have to go back to the 1950s, where the foundational mechanics of this exact psychological exploit were first documented. In 1954, psychologist B.F. Skinner designed what became known as the conditioning chamber. He placed a lab animal inside with a simple lever. At first, every time the animal pressed the lever, it got a food reward. The behavior became fixed, predictable, logical. The animal ate when it was hungry and it stopped when it was full. But then, Skinner changed the rules. He made the reward variable. Now, pressing the lever yielded a reward purely by chance. Half the time, absolutely nothing happened. Sometimes a huge reward dropped. The result? The animal became frantically obsessed. It pressed the lever endlessly, completely consumed by the sheer unpredictability of the outcome. Section 3. The dopamine-fear loop. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what's happening in modern toxic human relationships. The manipulator has effectively turned themselves into that lever, and their affection is the variable reward. You never know when you're going to get it or what you'll have to do to earn it. Which brings us to the core mechanism that locks the trap in place. It turns out there is a massive biological misconception about dopamine. We usually think of it as the happy or reward chemical, right? Well, actually, scratch that. It's the neurochemical of anticipation and survival. It doesn't flood your brain when you are satisfied. It floods your brain when you're desperately anticipating what comes next. When a reward is uncertain, your brain pumps out massive amounts of dopamine to force you to focus on securing that survival signal. Because the manipulator's affection is entirely random, your brain is kept in a permanent state of high alert anticipation. It treats their validation like it's literally a matter of life and death. You aren't sticking around because you're happy, you are sticking around because your neurochemistry simply cannot resist the primitive urge to resolve the uncertainty. This intense anticipation completely overrides your logical mind. You see the red flags, your friends point out the red flags, but that chemical drive to secure the next hit of validation, it's just overpowering. Section 4. A neurochemical addiction. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how clearly it separates a healthy, trusting bond from algorithmic manipulative habituation. What we're talking about here isn't just a metaphor, it's a literal biological addiction. processing a toxic relationship takes a massive physical toll on the human brain. You're caught in this cycle of fear when they pull away, followed by a huge dopamine spike when they briefly return, which creates a loop that just exhausts your neural pathways. Genuine connection is consistent. It builds trust, safety, and a calm nervous system. It does not feel like a roller coaster. Dopamine anticipation, on the other hand, is completely unpredictable. It builds anxiety, panic, and deep physical exhaustion. People often mistake that adrenaline and anxiety for passion, but trust me, it's not passion, it's habituation. Let's look under the hood at exactly what breaks down inside your head. Right behind your forehead is the prefrontal cortex. This is your brain's executive command center for logic, willpower, and decision-making. Now, unlike other parts of your body, this area burns a highly volatile physical fuel, glucose. When you are forced to constantly process a manipulator's unpredictable, chaotic behavior, you burn through this glucose at an industrial rate. Eventually, your brain enters a state of literal neurochemical bankruptcy. Your logical barriers fall apart, your impulse control completely fails. You simply lose the physical and mental energy to fight back. This state of mental burnout has a name. It's called calculated exhaustion. And I want to be incredibly clear about this. This exhaustion is not an accidental byproduct of a bad relationship. It is the manipulator's intended goal. By keeping you in a state of permanent anxiety and unpredictability, they deplete your cognitive resources on purpose. They want to eliminate your ability to resist, set boundaries, or simply say no. You become a passive observer inside your own life. Just let that sink in for a second. When your executive function is completely depleted, you lose your mental sovereignty. You stop making proactive choices about your future, your happiness, or your boundaries. You're just surviving day to day, waiting to see what mood the other person is in, waiting to see if you're going to get the punishment or the reward. It's a chilling reality. Section 5. Reclaiming your mental sovereignty. Let's pivot from the dark mechanics of the problem to the empowering solution. So the crucial point is, how do we actually break this spell? Well, the incredible thing about the human brain is that once you see the invisible architecture of a trap, it begins to lose its power over you. To reclaim your mental sovereignty, you follow 3 steps. First, recognize the variable reward pattern. When the coldness abruptly turns into a grand romantic gesture, label it for what it is, Skinner's lever. Second, truly understand that the intense craving you feel is a chemical reaction to uncertainty, not deep true love. And third, you must rebuild your executive function. The only way to replenish the glucose in your prefrontal cortex is through distance and absolute consistency. Which brings us to the core thesis of our explainer today. Awareness is your ultimate defense. A manipulator relies on you believing that the chaos is somehow your fault, or that the intense anxiety you feel is just a sign of a soulmate connection. But once you can clearly see the neurochemical mechanics of the manipulation, once you see those gears turning right beneath the surface, the illusion shatters, the spell breaks. You realize you aren't broken at all. You were just biologically hacked. Which leaves us with one final, kind of mind-bending thought to consider as we wrap up today's explainer. If your brain is capable of literally rewriting reality just to protect you from the terrifying unpredictability of one person, what other patterns is your brain protecting you from seeing? Look closely at your habits, your digital life, your daily routines. The mechanics of attention and manipulation are everywhere once you know how to look for them. Stay curious, keep observing, and we'll see you in the next explainer.